Moses is one of the most prominent figures in biblical history, a man whose life was marked by miracles, challenges, and an intimate relationship with God. From his birth, his journey was surrounded by extraordinary events. Born in a time of great oppression for the Hebrews, he was saved from certain death through a combination of courage and divine providence. The daughter of Pharaoh, upon finding the baby floating in a basket on the Nile, decided to adopt him and raise him as a prince of Egypt. Thus, Moses grew up in a palace, surrounded by luxuries, while his people suffered under the chains of slavery. As the years went by, Moses began to feel the weight of his true heritage. He witnessed the oppression of his Hebrew brothers and, in an act of anger and defense, killed an Egyptian who was beating a Hebrew. This act of rebellion forced him to flee to Midian, where he began a new life as a shepherd. During this time in the desert, Moses encountered God for the first time in a burning bush, where he received his divine mission, to lead the Hebrews out of Egypt and guide them to the Promised Land. Moses was not just a liberator but also a legislator. On Mount Sinai, he received the tablets of the law, which became the moral and ethical foundation not only for the Israelites but also for the civilizations that would follow. His relationship with God was deep, marked by intimate dialogues and fervent intercessions for the people he led. He was a man of faith but also of weakness. Moments of doubt and disobedience stained his journey, especially the episode when, instead of speaking to the rock as God commanded, he struck it. This act of disobedience had severe consequences, preventing him from entering the Promised Land. As Moses led the Israelites through the desert, he also faced a constant battle against the unbelief and rebellion of the people. In every challenge, he turned to God for guidance and strength. His humility, manifested in his willingness to listen and mediate between God and the people, was one of his greatest virtues. Even when the people murmured against him, Moses interceded, asking God not to destroy them. This intercession reveals the pastoral heart of Moses and his commitment to the spiritual well-being of his people. Over the years, Moses became a central figure in the biblical narrative. His life not only shaped the history of Israel but also prefigured the coming of the Messiah, Jesus Christ. He was a prophet who, through his experience of liberation and leadership, prepared the way for the ultimate redemption that would come with Christ. Therefore, the importance of Moses goes beyond his own life. He became a symbol of hope and faith for all those who believe in God's promise. However, Moses' life was far from ending with his death. In fact, his death and what followed were filled with profound spiritual significance. The Bible reveals that Moses died in the land of Moab, at the age of 120, and that God himself buried him in an unknown valley. This divine act of burial concealed the location of Moses' grave, a gesture laden with intention, to protect the body of the prophet from any form of idolatry that might arise. The obscurity of his burial raises questions about the spirituality of his life and his role in the struggle between good and evil. Why would Satan care so much to claim the body of Moses? What was at stake in this spiritual confrontation? These questions begin to explore the complexity of the divine plan and the cosmic battle that unfolds behind the scenes of human history. Satan, the figure of opposition, has always sought ways to thwart God's plans. He understood that Moses' life was not merely a story of redemption but a direct threat to his dominion. If Satan could claim the body of Moses, perhaps he could discredit the law and corrupt the spiritual leadership that Moses had established. Thus, Satan's desire to claim the body of Moses goes beyond the wish for a mere relic. It is an attack against the very essence of what God was doing on earth. The narrative of the dispute between the archangel Michael and Satan regarding the body of Moses, as described in the Epistle of Jude, is a crucial moment that reveals the depth of the spiritual battle unfolding in the invisible dimensions. This confrontation is not merely a matter of physical possession but a symbol of the eternal struggle between light and darkness, between the sacred and the profane. The significance of Moses in this entire conflict becomes evident as we explore what he represents in the divine plan. When God buried Moses in an unknown valley, a barrier was created to prevent any form of veneration from developing around his grave. However, Satan's determination to claim the prophet's body did not diminish. He presented himself in search of a resource that could discredit Moses' ministry and, by extension, God's authority. This is a fundamental aspect of the spiritual battle, Satan's attempt to undermine God's work and his people. The Epistle of Jude gives us a glimpse of this confrontation. The author mentions that Michael, one of the chief angels, did not dare to bring an accusation against Satan. Instead, he simply said, "The Lord rebuke you." This response is rich in meaning, as it demonstrates that Michael's authority does not come from his own strength but from God's sovereignty. He understood that the battle was not just his but belonged to the Lord, who is the true judge of all things. This episode raises profound theological questions about the nature of the spiritual battle. Why didn't Michael confront Satan more aggressively? The answer may lie in the understanding that in spiritual warfare, it is often humility and obedience to God that prevail. Michael did not wield power to defeat Satan, he relied on God's authority, a vital lesson for all believers. Just as Moses was an intercessor for the people of Israel, Michael becomes an intercessor in the spiritual battle, representing God's interests instead of seeking personal glory. Satan, for his part, is not an adversary to be underestimated. He understood the significance of the body of Moses and how he could use it to influence the people's worship. If he could claim possession of Moses' body, it could lead the Israelites to practice idolatry, diverting them from worshiping the true God. Satan's concern was not merely about a body but about the spiritual influence that Moses still had over the people, even after his death. During Moses' journey with the Israelites, he frequently urged the people to maintain their faith and trust in God. He emphasized the need to worship only God and never idols, and his life served as a model of leadership that constantly pointed to divine sovereignty. Therefore, Satan's attempt to claim Moses' body was a calculated strategy to destroy that influence. The secret location where God buried Moses also possesses symbolic significance. The obscurity of this grave represents divine protection against idolatry, as well as Moses' humility. He who was called to lead was also called to submit to God's will, even in death. This submission manifested not only in his life but also in his death, showing that the true leader does not seek personal glory but lives for God's glory. Michael's intercession was not merely a defense of Moses' position, but an affirmation of God's sovereignty over all creation. This serves as a powerful reminder for believers that, regardless of the struggles we face, we are not alone. The presence of God and his angels in our battles is a guarantee that he is in control. Michael's defense shows that even amidst intense spiritual conflicts, true victory belongs to the Lord. As the narrative unfolds, it becomes clear that the battle for the possession of Moses' body is more than an isolated event. It reflects a continuous spiritual struggle that permeates the entire history of salvation. This battle is not just about Moses, but about God's faithfulness and the fulfillment of his promises. Ultimately, the importance of Moses as the bearer of the law and leader of the people of Israel becomes even more evident in this context. The spiritual struggle for the possession of his body highlights how Satan will always seek to distort what God has established. The battle is not merely physical but a struggle for hearts and minds, a struggle for truth and faith. Thus, the story of Moses transcends his time and connects deeply with the challenges faced by believers today. The death of Moses is a moment filled with symbolism and spiritual significance. At 120 years old, he died in the land of Moab, as determined by God. His death was not an end but a transition, and the manner of his burial reveals the depth of his relationship with God and the importance of his life in the narrative of redemption. God himself buried Moses in an unknown valley, and this action is rich with divine intentions. The fact that his burial site remains hidden indicates God's protection over Moses and the need to prevent any form of idolatry that could arise after his death. This concealment acts to safeguard the integrity of worship to the Lord, ensuring that the focus remains on God and not on a relic. The secret grave stands as a testament to Moses' humility. Even after his death, he was not to be elevated to a status that could divert the people from their worship of the living God. Moreover, the death of Moses marks a culminating point in the Israelites' journey. He led the people for 40 years through the wilderness, and his life was an example of faith, perseverance, and leadership. However, Moses himself did not enter the Promised Land, a detail that highlights God's sovereignty over all things. Despite his greatness, Moses had to submit to divine will, a powerful lesson about the importance of obedience. The narrative of Moses' death does not end merely with his burial. It connects to a significant event in the New Testament, the Transfiguration of Jesus. In Matthew 17, we read that during the Transfiguration, Moses and Elijah appeared alongside Jesus, symbolizing the law and the prophets. This moment of revelation is fundamental, as it demonstrates that Moses, even after his death, remains a central figure in God's plan. He not only fulfilled his role as legislator and leader, but his presence at the Transfiguration confirms the continuity of divine purpose. The resurrection and presence of Moses during the Transfiguration imply that death is not the end but a new stage in the spiritual journey. This echoes the central message of Christianity, the promise of resurrection and victory over death. The fact that Moses and Elijah appeared with Jesus reinforces the idea that all who serve God have a place in his eternal plan. Therefore, Moses becomes an example of faith and hope for all believers. Furthermore, Satan's desire to claim the body of Moses reveals his malice and his relentless struggle against God's plan. By seeking possession of the body, Satan aimed not only to discredit Moses but also to frustrate God's redemptive plan. This struggle reflects the spiritual battle that we all face, where the forces of evil attempt to divert God's people from truth and genuine worship. The confrontation between Michael and Satan, along with the death and burial of Moses, reminds us of the reality of the spiritual battle that permeates our lives. The need to remain steadfast in faith and to seek God's guidance is crucial. Moses' life serves as a testimony that, despite difficulties and failures, those who submit to God are used to fulfill His eternal purposes. The story of Moses is a powerful narrative that invites us to reflect on our own lives and how we are often called to serve amidst challenges. Moses, a man who felt inadequate for his mission, was chosen by God to liberate a people and establish a new covenant. This teaches us that God often chooses the unlikely and the imperfect to fulfill His plan, demonstrating that a person's strength lies not in their abilities but in their willingness to obey and trust in God. Ultimately, the battle for the possession of Moses' body leads us to a profound understanding of spirituality and divine authority. Michael's intercession and God's protection over Moses reveal that, despite the struggles we face, God is always present, acting in our lives. The resurrection of Moses at the Transfiguration is a symbol of hope and the assurance that all who serve God, even after death, have a place in His kingdom. This story of Moses, which began with a baby hidden in the waters of the Nile and culminated in a spiritual struggle for his body, shows us that life is a journey filled with challenges and triumphs. Each of us is called to play a role in this grand plan of redemption, where our faith and obedience to God can impact not only our lives but also those around us. Just like Moses, we are invited to lead, to intercede, and to trust in God's sovereignty, knowing that in the end, He will always prevail over all forces of evil.